Movies about giant monsters have always fascinated filmmakers. It probably began with the legendary 1933 film King Kong. That movie was a massive success and saved its struggling studio from bankruptcy. Back then, box office tracking wasn't the norm, so it's unclear exactly how much money the film made over its theatrical run. Still, the numbers were likely impressive enough to earn admiration for decades. Many filmmakers tried to replicate King Kong's success by sticking to a similar formula. Introduce a monster, often created by exposure to atomic radiation or some bizarre growth trigger, and let it loose in a city where people either battle it or befriend it. Despite some exceptions, like Japan's Godzilla, most of these films flopped or delivered average box office results. Take the 1976 King Kong remake, for example. Dino De Laurentiis nearly bankrupted his studio producing it. Although he salvaged the situation by selling distribution rights internationally, the movie barely broke even in the U.S., leaving De Laurentiis with a much smaller return than expected. Unsurprisingly, the sequel was made on a shoestring budget. Roland Emmerich's Godzilla in the 1990s followed a similar path. While the box office numbers weren't a total disaster, the movie's record-breaking marketing budget sank its profitability. The studio had planned sequels, but lukewarm reviews made them hesitate to commit to spending another $140 to $150 million. Peter Jackson took a swing at the genre in the mid-2000s with his remake of King Kong. However, the high marketing costs meant the film only turned a profit after its home video release. Plans for an expanded King Kong universe were promptly shelved. Fast forward to 2013, and Hollywood gave the giant monster genre another shot with Pacific Rim. The movie's existence can be credited to the success of Michael Bay's Transformers. Studios wanted to replicate that success, but with a fresh twist. Pacific Rim brought giant robots into the mix, alongside colossal monsters. The production didn't face any major disasters, but the budget spiraled out of control. Initially set at $140 to $150 million, the final cost ballooned to $190 million. Guillermo del Toro's insistence on using real steel instead of cheaper plastic props caused significant delays and extra expenses. Meanwhile, the studio pushed for an expensive 3D conversion, which del Toro only agreed to if it was done with the highest quality. The test screenings were promising. Even director Rian Johnson, known for Looper, Knives Out, and Star Wars: The Last Jedi, praised the film, predicting audiences would be blown away. Yet the U.S. release was a disappointment. Pacific Rim opened in third place, trailing behind Despicable Me 2 and Adam Sandler's Grown Ups 2. By its second week, it dropped to sixth place, losing even to the underperforming Red 2. The international box office saved the film from complete disaster. While it grossed $101 million in the U.S., overseas earnings added $309 million. However, the $410 million total wasn't ideal for a movie with a $190 million production budget. Worse yet, only 25% of the $115 million it earned in China went back to the studio, roughly $30 million. Factoring in a high marketing budget, the movie ultimately lost $15 to $20 million. Some blame the poor performance on Pacific Rim being too niche. General audiences didn't connect with the film's kaiju references or its nods to Japanese Godzilla movies. Others argue that the dominance of Michael Bay's Transformers franchise overshadowed del Toro's robots, which couldn't transform into anything exciting. Guillermo del Toro faced criticism for not casting big-name actors who could have drawn more viewers. For instance, Tom Cruise was highly interested in the project during its early development. He was initially considered for the role that eventually went to Idris Elba. Cruise wanted his character to have more screen time, but the studio refused to compromise. Henry Cavill was also considered at one point, but back then he likely wouldn't have boosted the film's box office much. In hindsight, Cruise's involvement might not have helped either, judging by his performances in Edge of Tomorrow or Oblivion. When studios face a situation like Pacific Rim, they typically have three options. 1. Abandon the sequel altogether, like the creators of The Golden Compass did after similar box office struggles. 2. Take a risk and go bigger, as Warner Brothers did with The Dark Knight after Batman Begins. Granted, this comparison is flawed since Batman already had massive name recognition. Or 3, reduce the budget for the sequel and pivot the strategy, as Fox did with the second Wolverine film. Legendary opted for the third route. They cut costs and focused on the market where the first film had performed best, China. Guillermo del Toro's ideas for the sequel were scrapped. His vision, which centered on life after the portal was closed, was abandoned. Instead, Stephen S. DeKnight, known for his work on Spartacus, Daredevil, and Smallville, was brought on to direct. Pacific Rim Uprising became his feature film debut. The studio slashed the budget to $130 to $140 million. They also revamped the action sequences, addressing complaints that the fights in the first movie were too slow. Every main actor was replaced. Idris Elba gave way to John Boyega. On paper, these choices seemed smart. However, the rebranding effort caused production to drag on for a year and a half. Continuous delays led to repeated reshoots as test screenings repeatedly revealed problems. According to DeKnight, he was thrilled to reshoot scenes based on audience feedback. For example, when test viewers found the storyline confusing or couldn't connect with the characters, he grabbed John Boyega to film a new opening sequence for clarity. DeKnight saw these changes as improvements, but they inflated the film's budget to $150 million. Pacific Rim Uprising hit theaters in March 2018. It debuted at number 1, dethroning Black Panther after 6 weeks at the top. Despite this, the film earned just $28 million in its opening weekend in the U.S., a sharp drop compared to the original's $37 million debut. International markets, particularly China, once again stepped in to salvage the numbers. The sequel earned $63 million in China during its first 3 days, outperforming the first film's $45 million. However, the success was short-lived. By its second weekend, the Chinese box office dropped by a staggering 85%, with the film earning just $9 million. In total, the sequel grossed $100 million in China, a disappointing number given the country's booming box office market by 2018. In the U.S., Uprising fell to 5th place in its second week, and its domestic total failed to surpass $60 million. Globally, the movie earned $290 million, a modest return compared to its $150 million budget. By the time the sequel was released, Legendary had become a Chinese-owned company and was able to claim a larger share of the box office revenue. Even so, the film underperformed, and this time the failure seemed justified. Critics gave the movie poor reviews, and audiences weren't much kinder. Faced with the disappointing performance, Legendary scrapped any plans for a larger franchise. This was especially unfortunate because prior to its release, the studio had teased a potential crossover between Pacific Rim and its other properties like Godzilla. A shared universe seemed plausible, especially since Godzilla and King Kong also belonged to Legendary. However, things hadn't gone smoothly for those franchises either. The second Godzilla film bombed at the box office, almost killing the MonsterVerse entirely. Surprisingly, Godzilla vs. Kong managed to perform well, despite its simultaneous release on HBO Max. It's possible that movies about giant robots and monsters will fade into the background until the next genre-defining hit, like Transformers, comes along. In hindsight, it's hard to say how things would have turned out if Guillermo del Toro had helmed the sequel. It's doubtful the results could have been worse. At the very least, del Toro's vision might have given the film a more distinctive identity. The only winner in all of this was Guillermo del Toro himself. Freed from the sequel's production, he went on to create The Shape of Water, which won him 2 Academy Awards. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.